Imagine a Mongol battlefield. The wind sweeps across the steppe, dust swirling around thousands of riders moving as one. Bows are drawn, arrows whistle through the air, and enemies fall long before the Mongols ever come close. And yet, for all their power, something was missing. No lines of warriors clashing blade to blade. No flashes of steel swords crossing in the chaos. Why would the most feared warriors in history, the warriors who carved out the largest land empire the world has ever seen, rarely use swords at all? Welcome to Great History, your daily dive into the incredible world of ancient warfare. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, because we bring you powerful stories of strategy, conquest, and survival every single day. In this episode, we'll uncover why the sword never became the weapon of choice for the Mongol Empire, and how that decision reveals the ruthless logic behind their dominance on the battlefield. Let's start with what truly defined the Mongols: their bows. The Mongol composite recurve bow was the heart of their entire military system. This bow was small enough to use while galloping at full speed, but powerful enough to rival, and in some cases even surpass, the famous English longbow in both range and penetration. That's incredible when you think about it. The English longbow was over 6 feet tall and fired heavy arrows with deadly force. Yet the Mongol bow, less than half that size, could match it. The secret lay in its construction. Instead of being made from a single piece of wood, the Mongol bow was a composite weapon. Layers of horn, wood, and sinew glued together under tension. The horn gave it strength, the sinew gave it flexibility, and the shape, recurved at both ends, stored tremendous energy when drawn. When released, it sent an arrow flying at speeds that could pierce armor even at a distance. And the Mongols built their entire battlefield strategy around distance and attrition. Their main goal was to destroy the enemy's strength before the two sides even touched. Imagine thousands of mounted archers circling your formation, loosing arrows again and again and again. Every volley whittled down your numbers, broke your formations, and drained your morale. It's easy to underestimate what that meant in practice. A Mongol arrow could travel well over 300 yards effectively. So by the time you even saw the whites of their eyes, your front lines might already be full of holes. Their strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Kill at range, conserve your men, and break your enemy's will before breaking their body. But of course, not every battle could be won from a distance. And that's where the second key element of their system came in: the heavy cavalry, or the batar. About 40% of a Mongol army consisted of these armored warriors. Unlike the light horse archers, they were covered in lamellar armor made of leather or metal plates, and their horses were often armored too. When it came time for the decisive blow, these were the men who delivered it. Their weapon of choice? The lance. A long, sturdy pole tipped with steel or iron, designed to turn the speed of a galloping horse into unstoppable force. When they charged, that combination of man, horse, and momentum created an impact few armies in the world could withstand. The Mongols' tactics always followed a rhythm: weaken, disorient, and then annihilate. They'd start by using their horse archers to harass and exhaust the enemy, circling, retreating, drawing their opponents into disarray. And only when the timing was perfect would the heavy cavalry surge forward, lances aimed straight for the heart of the broken formation. That final charge was about ending the battle in one swift, brutal moment. Now what about the sword? The Mongols did carry them, short, slightly curved sabers designed for slashing from horseback. But here's the thing: swords were never their main weapon. They were a last resort. If your lance broke, if your arrows were spent, if the chaos of battle forced you into close quarters, then you reached for your sword. That tells you a lot about how the Mongols thought about combat. To them, getting into a hand-to-hand fight meant something had gone wrong. Close combat was messy, unpredictable, and costly, and the Mongols hated waste, especially the waste of manpower. Their entire system was built around efficiency. Long-range fire kept their losses low. Controlled charges finished the fight fast. As for swords, those were for survival, not strategy. And actually, the Mongols didn't carry the straight sword we usually picture when we think of ancient warriors. What they used was a saber, a curved blade called the ild. Why curved, though? Why not just go with a straight sword like the knights in Europe? When you're swinging a weapon from horseback, your arm doesn't move in a straight line. It moves in an arc. You're high above the ground, leaning to one side, your sword arm tracing a wide circular motion as you pass an enemy. A straight sword would slice through with brute force, sure, but it wouldn't cut cleanly. The curved saber, on the other hand, naturally turns that swing into what's called a draw cut. A draw cut means you're slicing as the blade moves across the target. Think about cutting a piece of meat. If you just press down, it's hard to go through. But if you pull the knife while you press, it glides easily. That's exactly what the curve of the Mongol saber does. It turns motion into efficiency. Archaeologists have found that this design, a single-edged, slightly curved blade, usually around 80 to 90 centimeters long, was standard across the steppe from the 8th all the way to the 14th century. For 500 years, across thousands of miles, from the Turkic tribes of Central Asia to the Mongols of the East, this shape dominated. That alone tells you how effective it was. The Mongol saber also evolved from earlier Turkic designs, which had already spread widely across Asia. You can find similar shapes in Persia, in the early Islamic world, even in later Japanese katana design. Everywhere cavalry ruled, curved blades followed, because the mechanics simply worked better from horseback. Now there's another piece to this puzzle that people don't often think about: safety and control. Imagine you're charging at full gallop, swinging your sword at an enemy standing on the ground. If you use a straight sword and it pierces too deeply, there's a huge risk it'll get stuck. The impact might rip the weapon right out of your hand, throw off your balance, or worse, drag you halfway off your horse. And on the battlefield, losing your weapon or control of your mount, even for a second, can be fatal. That's where the curve comes in again. Because of its geometry, a curved blade doesn't go straight in. It glides through and out of the target. It slices, not stabs, which means it's much easier to pull free after every swing. That might sound like a small detail, but to a Mongol warrior flying past his target at 30 miles per hour, it meant the difference between continuing his charge or getting cut down where he stood. The Mongols valued mobility and continuity of action above everything else. Every part of their warfare depended on staying in motion. Strike, withdraw, reposition, strike again. A weapon that risked stopping that rhythm, even for a heartbeat, was unacceptable. So the curved saber fit perfectly into their logic. Hit fast, hit clean, and never stop moving. Let's break it down compared to a straight sword. A curved saber like the ild specialized in slicing. It maximized cutting trauma, minimized the chance of getting stuck, and allowed for rapid follow-up attacks. The trade-off? It wasn't great at deep penetration or stabbing through heavy armor. Meanwhile, a straight sword, the kind favored by European knights, was built for thrusting. It could punch through chainmail or between armor plates, but it came with serious risks on horseback. Poor cutting performance in sweeping attacks and a high chance of lodging deep into the target. In other words, each weapon reflected the world that created it. The straight sword belonged to the battlefield of formations, disciplined infantry lines, armored men on foot, fighting toe-to-toe. But on the steppe, there were no such walls of shields. Battles were fluid, fast, and spread across vast, open ground. You didn't need to stab through plate armor. You needed to slash, retreat, and slash again, sometimes while turning your horse mid-gallop. So let's look at what happened when they did run into heavily armored opponents. Because, make no mistake, they did. When the Mongols pushed westward into Eastern Europe in the 13th century, they faced armies of knights, men who looked like walking fortresses. A knight in full mail and plate could weigh as much as 250 pounds combined with his armor and weapons. Even the horse might have armor plates strapped on. Against that kind of opponent, a saber's slicing edge, no matter how sharp, would glance off harmlessly. The Mongols knew this, and they had a plan. Their first line of attack was always distance. Thousands of mounted archers would rain down arrows from composite bows powerful enough to pierce light armor. Each arrow was aimed not at random, but at the weak points, the joints, the faceplate, the gaps beneath the arm. But eventually, someone had to go in for the kill. That's where the shock troops came in. The Mongols' answer to armor was momentum. The heavy cavalry, known as batar, charged with long lances or spears, weapons that could turn the raw power of a galloping horse into a single, devastating impact. When you combine a 1,000-pound horse, a 200-pound rider, and a metal-tipped lance, the energy behind that strike can be equivalent to a small-caliber bullet. One good hit could knock a knight clean out of the saddle or crush him even through his armor. But battles rarely stayed neat. Once that first clash broke the line, everything descended into chaos. Horses pushing, soldiers shouting, the air thick with dust and blood. That's when the Mongols switched weapons. They reached not for the saber, but for blunt force. Every heavy Mongol cavalryman carried a mace or a war axe alongside his saber. These weren't decorative sidearms. They were armor killers. A mace, usually made of iron or bronze with a flanged or spiked head, didn't need to cut through armor. It simply smashed it. The impact could dent a helmet, break bones, or cause internal bleeding, even without puncturing the metal. Against a man in armor, blunt trauma was deadlier than a clean cut. And then there was the axe. The one-handed battle axe that could be swung from horseback with terrifying speed. The axe concentrated force along a narrow edge, making it perfect for targeting weak points in armor, the neck gap, the shoulder joint, or the visor of a helmet. The Mongols used it like a scalpel, not a cleaver. Each swing was deliberate, meant to cripple rather than flail. What's fascinating is how modular this approach was. The Mongols didn't see weapons as fixed identities. They saw them as tools. The saber was for slashing down light infantry or chasing fleeing enemies. The mace and axe were for when you had to crack through armor. And the spear was the opening move, the weapon of pure kinetic destruction. It's easy to imagine a Mongol warrior as a blur of motion, first charging with a lance to break the line, then dropping it, pulling a mace from his belt, and swinging it in one brutal arc to shatter a knight's chest plate. And if that mace broke or got stuck, only then would he draw his saber, not to pierce armor, but to finish off the wounded, to cut down those trying to escape, or to fight his way free if surrounded. All of this shows something deeper about Mongol warfare. Their strength didn't come from having the best weapon, but from knowing exactly when to use the right one. In fact, you could think of their arsenal as a step version of a modern soldier's toolkit. Every weapon had its job, and every warrior knew how to switch roles in seconds. That's why the curved saber, as elegant as it was, remained a secondary weapon. It wasn't built to pierce plate armor. It was built for speed, agility, and clean strikes during pursuit. Against a fully armored knight, the Mongols didn't rely on it. They relied on tactics, teamwork, and physics. So, the next time you imagine a Mongol charging into a wall of knights, don't picture him trying to slice through steel. Picture him calculating, knowing exactly which weapon on his belt could turn that fight in his favor. Maybe it's a lance to throw a man off balance. Maybe it's a mace to crush his ribs. Maybe it's an axe to split open a helmet. The curved saber? That comes later, when the real work of winning the battle is already done. Okay, let's take a step back for a second, because the real story isn't just about how the Mongols fought, but why they fought the way they did. The reasons go deeper than tactics or muscle memory. It's not just about battlefield tactics. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes. After all, how you live determines what you can fight with. Think about the Mongols' way of life. They were nomads, constantly on the move across the vast grasslands of Central Asia. That lifestyle was incredibly effective for mobility and survival, but it came with one big drawback. It didn't lend itself to complex industrial production. High-quality metal weapons, especially those sleek, curved sabers you see in movies, needed something nomads didn't have: stable workshops, heavy tools, and access to iron ore. To make a good steel blade, you need furnaces that can reach very high temperatures, a steady supply of charcoal, and skilled smiths who can carefully forge, temper, and fold the metal. None of that is easy when you're herding livestock across the steppe and packing up camp every few days. So how did they deal with it? The Mongols got creative and practical. When they needed sophisticated weapons or siege engines, they turned to the experts, craftsmen and engineers from the peoples they conquered. Chinese artisans, Persian smiths, and Muslim engineers were often conscripted to handle complex jobs like building siege engines or forging fine weapons. That meant high-grade steel sabers were often made far from the steppe, in settled regions under Mongol control. And that, in turn, made supplying them to the front lines much harder. It's easy to picture how messy that could get logistically. Imagine you're deep in campaign, hundreds of miles from a city workshop, and your saber blade chips or cracks. You can't just replace it or have it reforged. You'd need to wait for supplies or loot one from your enemies. That's not exactly ideal when your army's main advantage is speed. That's why the Mongol logistical system, famous for being fast, flexible, and self-sufficient, prioritized simplicity. Their whole military machine was built around what they could repair or replace on the move. Every soldier carried a basic toolkit, a small file for sharpening arrowheads, some spare bowstrings, and materials to fix their own gear. Their main weapons, the bow, the spear, and the axe, were easy to maintain and, if lost, easy to replace. A bow could be repaired with sinew, horn, and wood from the steppe. A spear or axe could be fashioned from materials on hand or scavenged after battle. But a saber? That was a different story. Forging a curved steel blade required advanced metallurgy and time. A well-made saber could take a skilled blacksmith several days, sometimes even a week, to produce. And that's assuming they already had the raw materials. To make one saber, you'd need several pounds of high-quality steel, which itself required smelting roughly 20 to 30 pounds of iron ore and large amounts of charcoal. Now imagine trying to do that on the open steppe, where you're constantly on the move and your main factory is a campfire and a saddlebag. It just wasn't practical. Even in settled regions like northern China or Central Asia, steel was expensive. Historical estimates suggest that during the 13th century, the cost of a fine steel sword or saber could equal a month or more of a skilled worker's pay, or roughly 10 times the cost of a spear or battle axe. In an army of tens of thousands of men, equipping every soldier with a steel saber would have been an enormous financial burden, not to mention a logistical nightmare when it came to replacement and maintenance. Even after the Mongols conquered regions rich in metalwork, like northern China or Persia, large-scale production was still a huge challenge. Imagine trying to arm an army of 200,000 men with handcrafted blades. Unrealistic. Most Mongol soldiers were light cavalry, around 70 to 80%, and they relied on their bows, lances, and axes. Only the elite units, maybe 20 or 30%, carried sabers regularly. In a Temüjin of 10,000, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 had one, and even those were often captured weapons. High-ranking officers and the emperor's bodyguard, the Kishig, an elite unit handpicked from across the empire, often carried sabers made of the finest steel, sometimes inlaid with gold or decorated with animal motifs. These weapons weren't just meant to kill, they were meant to impress. It was a mark of prestige, a sign that you had made it. Archaeological evidence and historical records show that such weapons were mostly found among those Mongol aristocracy. Much like how the samurai's katana later symbolized his soul, the curved saber came to represent the warrior spirit of the Mongol elite. For the average soldier, though, simpler tools ruled the battlefield. A sturdy axe or a good mace was cheaper, easier to repair, and far more reliable in a fast-moving campaign. After all, mobility was the Mongols' greatest strength. Every piece of gear had to be light, practical, and easy to maintain in the field. In such a system, complex or maintenance-heavy weapons had little value and just didn't make sense. However, we have to remember, by the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire stretched from Hungary all the way to Korea. And that meant their arsenals absorbed whatever was practical, effective, or even prestigious from the peoples they conquered. Archaeological finds and period illustrations show that some Mongol warriors actually carried straight, double-edged swords, similar to the Chinese jian, or the straight blades used by Persian and Turkic cavalry. These weapons weren't common, but they did exist, mostly among elite guards, high-ranking officers or soldiers stationed in more settled regions of the empire. And when their armies marched west into Europe, some even picked up European arming swords as trophies, straight, cross-guarded, double-edged swords almost identical to what medieval knights carried. Typically, these straight swords were about 70 to 90 centimeters long and weighed around 1.2 to 1.5 kilograms. Light enough for fast strikes, but solid enough for both cutting and thrusting from horseback. Still, the fact that straight swords appeared in the Mongol arsenal tells you something important. The Mongols weren't picky about weapons. They were pragmatists, unlike the European knights, who often saw the sword as an extension of their identity, a badge of chivalry and personal valor. The Mongols didn't fight for glory or reputation. They fought to win, to survive, to conquer. If a weapon proved useful, it stayed. If it didn't, it was discarded without hesitation. What mattered was simple. Could it kill the enemy? And could it keep them alive? The Mongols didn't worship their weapons, they worshipped results. That cold, almost mechanical sense of practicality was the secret engine behind their success, turning a loose confederation of nomads into one of the most efficient war machines the world has ever seen. That's the essence of Mongol warfare, pure practicality. The straight sword never became their ultimate weapon like the bow. But when steel was sharp and survival was on the line, the Mongols would use whatever it took to win. Thanks for sticking around and exploring this with me. If you enjoyed this story, share it with a friend who loves history, leave your thoughts in the comments, and hit like and subscribe so we can keep bringing these forgotten stories to life. See you in the next one.